It's animation, film, television, you name it. Welcome to the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever edition, full edition, I should say, of the Outdated Entertainment Hour. My name is Bob Smith. You may remember me from my 17 years with Good Times Magazine in Long Island, covering the music scene there and nationally as well. And we're glad you're here. You also might remember me from my stint with Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine for many years in the 80s and 90s, and my career as a recording artist. We'll get into that in just a moment. But in any event, we're glad you're here, and we're awful happy to be starting this secondary podcast on the heels of our first one. So it's been a real treat doing all this over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years. So why you, Bob Smith? Who the heck are you? Why are you doing a podcast like this? Well, a lot of people know me from my sports background, both in legitimate sports. Not that pro wrestling isn't a legitimate sport. Bite your tongue. But in any event, no, I toured the country for 15 years under the stage name of Robert Charles. Charles is my father's middle name. And I was a blues singer. We toured the entire US of A. Made 4 albums, all of which are still in print after all these years. And you can hear most of my music on Amazon, Spotify, and other places like that. So I think I'm semi-qualified to talk about entertainment because I've been part of the scenes in various ways for my entire adult life. Now, what's this show going to be about? Well, we're going to talk about movies. We're going to talk about television, radio, music, lots of music. We're going to have rock and roll, blues, you name it. In fact, an upcoming episode will feature a band I consider to be the most underrated of all time and should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're going to do a whole show on that. But to start things off, Brian R. Solomon, a great writer who's done entertainment books of his own. He did a film book about Godzilla, the Godzilla FAQ, which is still in print and a great read. And we're going to talk about all sorts of things with a focus at the beginning about superheroes and animation, because he also wrote a great book last year called Superheroes, the History of a Pop Culture Phenomenon from Ant-Man and Zorro, which was a bestseller. And you're going to want to know more about Brian, and you're going to want to know more about his feelings on a lot of pop culture. So we're going to have a lot of fun. And we're going to start with this episode. Brian kind of reached out to me when he found out that I was doing this particular kind of show, and I'm glad he did. He's one of a kind. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing what he has to say. But before we get to saying it, we have a short commercial announcement here, and we'll be right back. And we're going to talk about a whole lot of entertainment with Brian R. Solomon. Don't go nowhere.
This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/What is ham radio? See you on the air.
All right, everybody. When I came up with this cockeyed idea to do an entertainment nostalgia podcast, I announced it on Facebook. I made a nice logo for it and put a placard out. And somebody raised their hand and said, I want to talk. I said, you got to be kidding. And I said, you're in. And here's why. I'm very proud to have this gentleman as our first guest here because he is a multicultural writer, I would say, a multi-themed writer. A lot of people know him from the world of professional wrestling. He's won multiple awards for a best-selling book about a wrestler named the Sheik. It's called Blood and Fire: The Unbelievable Real-Life Story of Wrestling's Original Sheik, which is one of the greatest wrestling books I've ever read. But he's also written, pop culture books. He wrote a great book about Godzilla, FAQ. It's called Godzilla FAQ. He's also works for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and he's been a journalist in many different ways. I want to welcome to this show, because he's been on my other show. This is Brian R. Solomon. Brian, thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Bob. Like I said, this gives me a chance to talk about other stuff besides wrestling, which I enjoy talking about.
Yeah. We're all multifaceted, or at least we should be.
Yes.
You see, here's the problem. As a wrestling guy, I'm not the type that goes to all the conventions and collects stuff. I just am not. I have this, my memory still works, so that's good enough for me. I don't put down people who do those things. I'm just saying that man does not live by bread alone. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Well, like I just said to Steve Gennarelli, actually, the other day, I said, man does not live by wrestling alone, because he saw a picture that I posted. I was at I took my son to the Stanford Symphony here. I actually, because he's in first grade now, I want to expose him to some of this stuff. And we had a subscription for the year. And I posted a picture of us at the orchestra. And he said something like, not just wrestling, but culture. And that's when I said, man cannot live on wrestling alone. I really, that's just the tip of the iceberg for me. And, it's funny, as you probably know, with social media these days, too, on Twitter and the algorithm and stuff, they actually penalize you. The algorithm will penalize you if you talk about the things you don't normally talk about. So that tweets that you make that are not about the typical subject you talk about will get less exposure, less traction. And so it encourages people to just kind of myopically talk about the same things all the time. And, I love a million different things. I have a million interests. I'm incredibly eclectic. And wrestling is just like a piece of the pie,
Right, exactly. And what you talked about the myopic algorithms is kind of like what the top 40 used to be.
Yeah.
All people heard was the top 40 and didn't know there's an entire world full of other kinds of music out there, other styles, other artists and things like that. So it's nothing new to try to pigeonhole people into a profit center, as it were.
It's true. I've noticed it even. Sometimes I'll tweet about just some random thing that interests me that people don't know me for, and it just doesn't really get anywhere near the response. And I think part of that is because a lot of the people who follow me for wrestling stuff, but it's also that I really do think that the stuff that's non-wrestling winds up getting boosted less than the stuff where I'm talking about wrestling. So I don't talk a lot about classical music or classic Hollywood cartoons and things like that.
Well, let's you and me talk about classic Hollywood cartoons. How about that?
Let's do it. Yes.
I'm going to start off with a press release that I received, I guess about 10 days ago or so. And it's exciting for people of Brian's age, although he's a lot younger than I am, but my age too, because MeTV is a popular nostalgia network. That's a free station. It's not available everywhere, but it's available in a lot of places across the United States. They're starting a second one called MeTV Tunes. And when I found out, and some of our contemporaries, Brian and I we're excited about this as well. It's all coming back on this one network. If you grew up watching the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour and Popeye and Top Cat and the Flintstones and go down the list, they are all going to be on MeTV Tunes. And we're excited about it. It debuts on June 25th. This just about made my entertainment year, I'm telling you. And, what do you think, Brian? Are you excited about this too?
Yeah, because, I posted the press release when it first happened. I was so excited because I've been following this for a long time. Essentially, what a channel like this amounts to, and this is part of the problem, is this is what Cartoon Network was originally launched to be 30 years ago by Turner Entertainment. That's right. And eventually that's what Boomerang was supposed to be. What they started finding was that all these cable networks, everyone was doing it. Sci-Fi Channel was doing it, Comedy Central. the thing to do became create your own new fresh content, because you could monetize it, you could merchandise it, you own it, you don't have to lease it. And so they started to drop the vintage programming, which honestly is what a lot of people like us were tuning in for in the first place. So this channel feels like it's getting back to what that original mission was. Because my great love is the Hollywood studio cartoons of the theatrical era, the ones that were originally shown in movie theaters and later came to TV, in the later years, but like basically 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that era of studio cartoons. And then they were shown perpetually on TV, basically 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe a little beyond that. But then the cable channels took over. That's the stuff that I love. Those big MGM, Warner Brothers, Fleischer, UPA, whatever, all the great Walter Lantz, the Woody Woodpecker ones.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I adore. Leonard Maltin wrote a great book about them called Of Mice and Magic. And if people are interested in that exact subject, it is the greatest book you could buy about that subject, where he breaks down every single studio and the cartoons that they were known. I love that stuff.
And all this stuff still fascinates me to this day. And I'll tell you what, this new collaboration between Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns the old catalogs, and Weigel, which Weigel Broadcasting, which owns MeTV. So you and I, before we came on, I noted that a lot of stuff was on Max, which used to be HBO Max. They had almost the entire Warner Brothers catalog available there, as well as all of the Fleischer Popeyes, right? I'd say sometime last year, they took the Popeye off and cut the Warner Brothers original Looney Tunes in half. But they used to have page after page of them. You could just click and watch, but they disappeared. And I went, oh my gosh, we're never going to see this stuff again. They keep putting on places and taking it off. But when I got this press release, I went, oh my God, it's all coming back. It's thrilling to me, because I don't care if I'm as old as I am. I will watch Bugs Bunny 10 times out of 10.
See, the crazy thing about me is, and now I'm still excited about this launch, but like I was telling you before, I have a huge physical media collection. And I have, on Blu-ray and DVD, one of the most comprehensive classic animation, studio animation collections that you'll ever see in your life. Basically, anything that's been made available on DVD and Blu-ray of those studios that I talked about, I have. So, I mean, technically, I could pop those things on and watch them anytime that I want. And that's how I've introduced my kids to them, because of the reason you're talking about, that this stuff isn't omnipresent like it used to be when we were kids. Mm-hmm. But it's still super exciting to me. The idea, there's still that allure of linear television that's never going to leave me, where you could just click TV on, go to a channel, and something cool will be on. And you don't know what it is. It's like, it's appointment viewing. You tune in, let's see what they've got. And that's what this channel is going to be, where, it feels more, I think part of it is the idea that that other people are watching it with you somewhere in the world. Like, it makes it seem more special and important. It's like a communal experience. Oh, there's a movie on TV, everybody's watching it. That experience is not as common as it used to be. So I love the idea of a channel that's going to do this. Also, I want to point out too, the MeTV company, they're working with Warner Brothers Discovery, because Warner Brothers Discovery, they own the Looney Tunes, they own the Fleischer Popeyes, they own the MGM Tom and Jerry's and all that stuff, and they have Hanna-Barbera. They own a lot of stuff, but they're even working with companies beyond that. Like, they're working with Universal, because Universal owns the Woody Woodpecker cartoons. Mm-hmm. They're going to work with Columbia, which is Sony, which I think owns like Mr. Magoo. And I mean, there's a company. Yeah, they're going to get Mr. Magoo. There's a company for Casper, because Casper.
They were Novel Tunes?
They were originally the Novel Tunes, which were originally owned by Paramount. See, these things got fragmented over the years. Mm-hmm. Paramount also used to own the Popeyes, but they got sold to Turner and Warner Brothers. And now the Caspers these days are owned by a company called I may even be behind this too, a company called Classic Media, which I think was bought out by somebody else. What I'm trying to say is they're negotiating with a bunch of different companies to bring all these cartoons together. It's very impressive.
It really is. And, there's a lot of other stuff, they'll probably grab too. I look at the list of all the characters and shows that are coming on, and it's like, Terry Toons was another one that pops into my mind. And, there's all these 50s, 40s animation,
So
Walter Lantz, like you mentioned, it's like I haven't seen some of this stuff in literally decades.
Right. So Walter Lantz is Woody Woodpecker, Chilly Willy. That's Walter Lantz. I'm glad you mentioned the Terry Toons because this is a big deal with me. The Terry Toons, for people that aren't insane, that are wondering, the Terry Toons is like Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll, Farmer, Alfalfa. Like they were very common on TV. And of all the studios, I feel like they vanished the most, where they haven't been on TV in decades. And the weird thing about it is it's the only major Hollywood studio that never got a DVD release. Never. There has never been a DVD or Blu-ray release of those cartoons. The weird thing is, because I looked this up, because I am nuts, and I used to try to find out if one was going to come out. They're owned by CBS Viacom, which is also Paramount. So if they were going to pop up anywhere, it would be on Paramount Plus, and they're not on Paramount Plus. And I just feel like the problem with all this, Bob, is that if it's not kept alive, these brands, these characters, they fade away. People don't even remember them, so the demand isn't there, and you can't make money off of it. So it just sits in a vault.
Now I'm sitting here thinking, how many people remember Herman and Catnip?
Ah, yes.
Right?
My
Now,
son loves Herman and Catnip because of me. Because of me.
I will say, that particular animation studio loved. They were almost jarringly violent. Those cartoons. Yes. You agree with that?
Yeah. In fact, somebody was telling me once that Itchy and Scratchy on The Simpsons, right? Everybody assumes that's based on Tom and Jerry, but apparently Matt Groening, the creator, said it was based on Herman and Catnip.
I believe it.
Because those are, like you say, insanely violent. I mean, it's all cartoon violence, but it's like brutal violence. And I think that's the same. That's also the Novel Tunes studio, same studio that did Baby Huey and
Baby Huey.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Little Audrey, right?
Right.
My son, I show him all this stuff, and he loves Herman and Catnip of all things.
He does. Well, here's what bothered me about Herman and Catnip.
It's like a low rent Tom and Jerry is what it is. Because the Tom and Jerry ones are really high quality.
But the cat did not survive every episode. Let's put it that way. I'm serious. In a couple of those episodes, they off the cat at the end.
Yes. And I remember there were even a couple where, there would always be these mice, right, that would be victimized. They would be victimized by Catnip. And so Herman, voiced by the great Arnold Stang, would show up. And he would have to save all the mice, right? Because he was like the clever one.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple, because believe me, I'm telling you, I've seen them all because my son is obsessed. There are a couple where he actually eats some of the mice and they're dead. Where you actually see their ghosts going up to mouse heaven with little harps. And then Herman has to like avenge their murder by torturing and killing this cat. Children's entertainment, folks.
Children's entertainment, that's right. Those in the Bible stories, right? I don't know what to say.
It's like they really are low rent Tom and Jerry's, because the Tom and Jerry's are gorgeous. The animation's beautiful. The music, they have the MGM orchestra on those things. Like the same orchestra that's playing for Gene Kelly is playing on those cartoons. And the Herman and Catnip, that's a little more on the cheap, those.
Oh, you talked about gorgeous animation. Anybody talks about gorgeous cartoon animation, the first thing that always pops in my mind is Popeye versus, what is it, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves?
Yeah, and versus Sinbad the Sailor too,
where he's walking through that cave full of treasure.
Yeah,
and it's almost like a 3D optic view as he strolls inside that thing. It's beautiful. And considering that was made in what, 1941, 1930 something? I can't
Yes,
remember the year,
30s,
but it's
late 30s.
It's crazy how beautiful that animation is.
Well, the Fleischer Studio is such an interesting story because they're kind of like the WCW of animation. They are, because I hate to say that, but what I mean by that is they really went to war with Disney. They were on the front line. It was Disney versus Fleischer, and Fleischer lost. They just couldn't keep up. They didn't have the money, the resources. They were really trying their best to innovate, and they really get a lot better over time. And they are doing some of those Popeye things, along with like Gulliver's Travels. They did that movie. They were really trying to be like Disney. In fact, that's why they did some of those in color. That 3D thing you're talking about, they had a technique which they patented. It actually was a 3D set where they had a camera, a mechanism, I don't know how it worked, where it was like a circular thing where they could build a set. They could rotate. This was a physical miniature set. They could rotate it, film it as it was moving along, and then superimpose the animated cells over the film of this physical set and make it look like you had cartoon characters walking in real space. So, I mean, they were like pushing hard to compete, but in the end, they lost, sadly. Betty Boop, that was their thing, too.
What do you consider the last great funny theatrical cartoon? Because I have an opinion on this. I'm wondering what you would think. Now, let's go into probably at the late 60s when they stopped making, maybe even into the early 70s when they stopped making theatrical cartoons. Yeah. What do you consider the last great one? Because I have an opinion on that.
A lot of the studios were even belly up even by the end of the 50s. There were a few that soldiered on, like MGM. They were still trying to do Tom and Jerry's into the 60s. Walter Lantz, of all people, they were making Woody Woodpeckers into the 70s. I think they were like the last man standing. And so I'm trying to think, you know what? A late cartoon, which kills me. It makes me laugh. I don't know the exact year of it, but it's pretty late in the game. It's when Tex Avery went to work for the Walter Lantz studio, and it's a cartoon called The Legend of Rockabye Point. You know the one I'm talking about?
No, I've never seen that.
Okay. So it won an Academy Award. You'll know it. If you saw this, you would know it. It's the one where the premise of it is there's a polar bear that keeps it's trying to steal fish out of a fishing boat that's being guarded by a dog. And he has to rock the dog to sleep every time he wants to try to steal the fish. And the dog keeps waking up and biting him. So he keeps going, rockabye baby on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the wind blows, the cradle will fall. And then the dog falls asleep and invariably winds up biting him on the ass or the leg or something. And they do this until they're both old and gray. And it's hilarious. That might be the last of the really funny ones I could think of off the top of my head.
All right. But as a series, my choice is the Pink Panther cartoons.
Oh, yeah. Right. So the Pink Panther. All right. I'm getting really nerdy with all this stuff. I hope you don't mind.
No, you are dazzling me with your knowledge of this stuff. So please continue.
I'm telling you, I got to write a book. I got to write the book. So the Pink Panther cartoons are an anomaly. Here's how they came about. So in the 60s, at the very beginning of the 60s, the Warner Brothers Animation Studio went out of business.
Right.
And what they started doing is they still did some handfuls of cartoons, but they were contracting with outside studios to make them. So what happened was when they splintered, some of the big shots went and got their own studios, like Chuck Jones. He got his own studio. He did the Grinch and all that stuff. He did cartoons on his own. And he was doing Tom and Jerry actually for MGM for a while in the 60s. Another guy who left was Friz Freleng.
Right.
Friz Freleng, he paired up with a guy named DePatie was the guy's last name. And they started their own studio called DePatie Freleng Studios in the 60s and 70s. And they would do things like cereal mascots and cereal commercials. And they would do random like cartoon specials. They got hired by the Mirisch Company, which produced the Pink Panther movie, to do the opening and closing animated credits. and they wound up, and they owned that character, I think, or maybe it was licensed, and they wound up producing independent Pink Panther cartoons based off that. They started it right when all the other animation houses were dying. They were just getting started.
Right.
So I think those cartoons, because they went almost to 1980 with theatrical shorts, those cartoons might have been the very last studio-made, domestic, animated, short theatrical cartoons. They might have been the last one. I think you're right, actually, about that. Those really are the last really great studio short, really funny ones. And they they would even do an Inspector Clouseau one. Like, they had different ones that they would do.
That character was just the inspector, and then there was the ant and the aardvark, right?
Yeah, okay. So the ant and the aardvark. This is crazy. I'm so glad to be talking about this. All right. So you'll get this. You'll get it.
All right.
The original Ant and the Aardvark cartoons that were also DePatie Frilling studio shorts. What they did was, you know how Hanna-Barbera was known for this? They would give characters voices of famous celebrities. They have somebody impersonating them. So the idea was the ant had the voice of Dean Martin, somebody imitating Dean Martin. Aardvark was Jackie Mason, somebody imitating Jackie Mason, one of the most recognizable voices ever. And
one of them was John Byner, and I'm trying to figure out the actual voice actor was John Byner of one of the two, and I can't remember which is which.
Yes, I don't remember which one he was doing, but that was the idea of it. And I saw recently they revived. There was a new Pink Panther series that was like made for Netflix or something. And they revived a bunch of the characters, and my son was watching this. And I was very depressed because I think what happens is when they remake these cartoons, sometimes the younger people making them may not even get the reference of what the voice was supposed to be. So like the ant, the aardvark still has a voice that's kind of like Jackie Mason. But in a way, it's almost like, I don't even know if they knew it was Jackie Mason. He's just got this very stereotypical, like New York Jewish voice, like, oh, the ant is trying to capture me. I'm trying to capture the ant. Like he's doing that, but the ant is no longer Dean Martin. He's just got some other voice. And I think it's because I don't even think they realized that it was supposed to be Dean Martin. I think it just went over their heads. Very sad.
Obviously did. There has never been a revival of an animated cartoon that was as good as the original. Ever, ever, ever. They've tried to revive Looney Tunes a million times and all these other great characters, Tom and Jerry, you name it.
The most recent Looney Tunes that they created for Max, when they launched Max, they started a new series. It's the closest that they've ever come to the original ones, but it's still not in the same class. It's just a big part is the music. Yeah. They can never recapture.
That's exactly right.
Those studio orchestras, because you know what they would do, right? You know this. They would incorporate in the score all these little hints of popular songs, and they would add to the humor. Like, anytime there'd be a gorgeous woman would show up, they would start playing, "Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll." Like they would, not with the lyrics, but they would kick into the song, and it would give the audience a cue of what the scene was about, and that is, nobody could replicate that. So one thing they'll never replicate.
Warner Brothers had the rights to all that great music. So
yeah, exactly.
When Bugs Bunny is floating in a barrel in the Atlantic Ocean singing "Someone's Rocking My Dreamboat," they owned that song, right? They had that, right?
I learned all those songs thanks to Warner Brothers cartoons.
No, it's true. And
what's the other one he does? That it was a hit also for Doris Day, but I think Bugs Bunny's version is better. Oh man, I wish I could remember which one it is. Oh man, it's gonna kill me. I'll while we're talking, I'll have to look it up on my phone. Please continue.
I believe Someone's Rocking My Boat. He ends up on a gorilla island, if I remember that one correctly, which is another classic cartoon. I love Bugs Bunny.
Yes,
I love Foghorn Leghorn. Give me Sylvester and Tweety. I'm a Warner Brothers.
They are the funniest of all of them.
Billboard magazine, when Mel Blanc died, had a 2-page spread in the centerfold. Billboard. I don't know why it wasn't Billboard, but it was. When Mel died, I think sometime in the 80s, it shows every Warner Brothers character standing about 10 feet behind a microphone that had nobody there, and they're just looking down. It was a tribute to Mel Blanc. I bought a print of that, and it hangs to this day in my den. It's you know what? That's what I'm going to use to hype the show. And when we get this show done, I'm going to use that. I'm going to show that on Facebook because it's like that's how much I look at Mel Blanc of every entertainer of my lifetime, and I cannot think of one person who entertained me more in all my years on this planet than Mel Blanc. What do you think?
Yeah, he went back to radio, the Jack
Mhm.
Benny show, all these. He was the one that did the whole, Cucamonga, like that whole catchphrase, which became a classic thing on the Looney Tunes. But that was another thing. I had Lou Kippelman on my show recently.
Right.
And we talked because Lou, believe it or not too shocking for those who know Lou, he has this very rich, beautiful baritone voice. And Lou has done voiceover work. And we were talking about classic voiceover actors. And that is another dying breed because now they always use recognizable celebrities in cartoons and things.
Right.
There's no more, Mel Blanc and Paul Frees and Thurl Ravenscroft.
June Foray.
Yeah, June Foray, Dawes Butler, all these people that you know their voices, even though you may not know their name, you know their voices, Dawes Butler would be the dog on the Woody Woodpecker cartoons. He would go, brains, and point to his head.
And there was, I'm thinking of whoever did Stimpy's voice has done a million cartoons too. I'm trying to think
Billy
of
West.
Billy West. He's probably the last of the great Mohegans.
Billy West is a throwback.
There's a young lady
to
too who's a fantastic cartoon voice, but that's what she does. I can't think of her name right now, but there's a young lady that does it too. But you're right; it's a dying field because if you go to see like a CGI animated feature now, it's Kevin Hart and whoever they can corral to do it. People before. Invariably, the characters act like the actors, and it takes the fun out of it. For me, I prefer original things.
I told Lou, I think the beginning, I mean, that stuff goes way back, even like going back to the Jungle Book that, for Disney, that's got like Louis Prima in it. And, that was already a thing, but it really took over, I think, with Robin Williams in Aladdin. That was a huge one. I feel like when he was amazing, rest his soul. I mean, God, but the thing he did with the genie was so overpowering and incredible that it just changed the whole industry. Like that's what they wanted to recapture every time. Next thing you know, Eddie Murphy is the dragon in Mulan, and they just keep doing it and trying to replicate it over and over and over again, right up to this day.
I'm just before we get off this topic, I just want to read the list here from. Like I say, folks, it's Me TV Tunes. It's coming in June, and they're going to have Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Scooby Doo, Tom and Jerry, the Jetsons, Top Cat, Yogi Bear, Popeye, Johnny Quest, Fred Flintstone, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Woody Woodpecker, Casper, there he is, Betty Boop, bunch of other Porky Pig, and here's what's got me excited about it. You're probably excited too about this. Jerry Beck's going to be involved in this project.
He's the man. Jerry Beck is the man. Yeah. He's like the ultimate animation historian. When I see his name attached to something, I know right away it's legit.
And it's going to be good. It's just going to be fantastic. It's not going to be good. It's going to be great. So I'm glad you're as excited about the return of these old-time cartoons as I am, because I was afraid to ask you because I didn't know you're into that part of animation. But now apparently you're into it more than I am. Yeah.
I am way, way into it. I have been for a long time. Like I said, it is the thing that I need to one day write a book about. Top of my list as far as nonfiction books, non-wrestling.
I'll be first in Barnes and Noble to pick it up, my friend. I'll tell you that much right now.
One day.
Now, there's another kind of animation, which is comic books and superheroes. Our friend here is the author of a book that came out last year called Superheroes, the history of a pop culture phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro. And it's a fantastic... I don't know how to describe it again, because I'm going to let you describe the book, because there's nothing else like it out there. It's not just an A to Z list. It's a compendium that I've never read before. So explain that book to us.
Well, I did a couple of books before that were non-wrestling. One was called, I did Godzilla FAQ, and I did a book which was wrestling. It was called Pro Wrestling FAQ. And they were for a company that produced a line of books that were they were the FAQ series about various different pop culture topics. So there'd be a Beatles FAQ, Star Wars FAQ, whatever. And this book, the Superheroes one, It was originally supposed to be part of that series, but they rebranded it because they wanted each book to have its own standalone personality and not just be part of this FAQ thing. That's what they wanted. So what I did was I pitched the idea to them. They liked the Godzilla book, and they said, well, what are some other things like that you can do? And I had mentioned superheroes and comics, because to tell you the truth, that was something I wanted to do from when I was in my 20s. I had a friend of mine, my first job out of college was for a company called H.W. Wilson, which was a reference book publisher. And I was working with a guy, great friend of mine named Chris Mari, and we were both comic book fanatics. And we tried to pitch them on the idea of doing a reference book on the history of comic books that would focus on all the creators and all the characters. And they laughed in our face. This was like the late 1990s. They were just like, nobody's going to be researching that. No one cares about that. Let's focus on the Nobel Prize winners and world authors and things like that. Fine. So all these years later, that book was the dream of what we talked about back then, which was, it started out as almost like a biographical dictionary of the creators, the artists, the illustrators, what they were known for, what their backgrounds were. And it turned into this comprehensive history of not just comic books. That's the thing. It became bigger than that. It's the history of superhero fiction as a genre. So I go all the way back to mythology, folklore, history, people like, Robin Hood and Hercules. I mean, just the idea of a super hero in some way and how that leads to comics. And so comics are a big part of it. But then when you think about it today, now the main manifestation of superheroes today in our culture isn't even comic books anymore. It's movies. It's the movies based on the comic. They've completely overshadowed the comics to the point where, I read something the other day that DC was thinking about shuttering their comic book line completely and just focusing on movies, which is insane. But that's what happens when you're owned by a giant corporation.
I just turned white. You can't see it, but I all the blood just left my face when he said that. Yeah.
No, I read that because the thing that's happened is, in the old days, as I know recall, they were very rare superhero movies and TV shows, very rare. But when they happened, there was always the understanding that the comic book was superior to the movie, or the comic book was the definitive version of this character, and it's being adapted into a movie. And sometimes even when they'd make comic book adaptations of a superhero movie or show, they would draw the characters to look the way they looked in the comics, because those were considered to be, that's the definitive version. That's completely switched now, where the comic books now follow the lead of the movies. They follow the look of the movies. The characters act like they do in the movies. And so now you get, look, I've taught high school for years, and I'm telling you, you don't want to know this, but these kids, many of them don't even know that these characters come from comics. In fact, I would say almost all of them. They have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about comic books, but they know every character. They know their whole story. They know the whole mythos. They know it from movies. So that's why I could totally envision a time where comic books go away for that reason. When you have a company like, look, Marvel's now owned by Disney. They're not even independent. DC is owned by Warner Brothers. You could see a time coming where they go, well, what are we even keeping this going for other than just to create characters to adapt into movies? So, I mean, I could see that happening. But anyway, so the book became a look at the whole history of the superhero concept in time, right up to the present day.
So we've had, in the last 15 years or so many superhero blockbuster films. Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Superman versus Batman, Wonder Woman, of course, go down the list. But this year and last year, the bubble seems to have burst in terms of audience participation, shall we say, in a lot of these, new superhero movies. Do you think we've reached critical mass in terms of people getting burned out on this stuff, or do you think it's just bad movies?
No, I think it is overexposure. It's a real simple answer. I come from that generation where every couple of years we might get a superhero movie or a Batman movie and we'd go nuts. And that's all you got. And so, yeah, I was super excited going into the 2000s, starting with things like X-Men and Spider-Man, and then And then the Marvel Cinematic Universe really kicks off with Iron Man. Like, I was all aboard. I was all about it.
Mm-hmm.
Taking my kids, I was in my 20s and my 30s. This was like your dream come true. We would fantasize about, imagine if they made movies out of all the whole Marvel universe. Like, it really was a thing we would talk about. But there is such a thing as too much of a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I said it at the time, and history is proving me right. They should have stopped it at Endgame when they paid off I don't know how closely you followed all the movies, Bob, but when they paid off the whole storyline with Avengers Endgame and the defeat of Thanos, and it really felt like the end cap where they showed, Captain America, he goes to live in the past with his girlfriend. He gives up being Captain America. And, all these characters are going their separate ways. That really was the time to put it in mothballs. I'm not saying end it forever, because nothing goes away forever.
Mm-hmm.
But put it in mothballs. Let it sit for a few years until people start to miss it. And then what you do is you reboot the whole thing from the beginning. I'm talking about in a generation. With all new actors, you tell all new stories. You do it all over again when when it becomes a nostalgic thing. But because they have this idea of, no, you know what? We could just keep making these movies like this forever. Everybody wants to see an Eternals movie. Why wouldn't people want to see something called Madame Web about a woman who somehow has the powers of Spider-Man, but not really? Why wouldn't you want to see a movie about the mighty Thor's hairdresser's cousin? That's what we're at now. And they're making these TV shows, and it's the return on investment is shrinking. People really are burnt out. And I think enough is enough at this point. It's time to let it rest.
Well, here's the thing. And this is the weirdest thing. And I tell my friends this all the time. Between the late 60s, probably through 72, 73, I had a massive comic book collection. DC, Marvel. I liked them both equally. A little Charlton sprinkled in, like Jimmy's on an ice cream cone, But the new films leave me cold. I can't even put my finger on why. I have less than no interest in the superhero films. It's like, well, I saw the second Avengers film, which my ears are still ringing. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Talk about bombast for 2 hours. I mean, it was just a nonstop assault on the senses. And I left feeling like I had just run 5 miles. and I wasn't
They're very
entertained.
loud.
And there wasn't any plot. There wasn't a whole lot of plot, not a whole lot of acting. I just thought it didn't ring for me. But I'm still waiting for somebody out there. Disney, I don't know who owns this anymore. Disney, Marvel, whoever it is. That 1967 Grant Trey Lawrence animation Marvel superheroes TV series with the Hulk and Thor as Submariner and Captain America and Iron Man. I want it back. Oh, how I want it back. That was one of my favorite shows to this day. I have some bootlegs of it. They were supposed to re-release it on DVD about 15 years ago and scrapped the project for reasons I don't understand. The Spider-Man series that was on ABC, there was a DVD series of that. That's gone too.
And it's not on Disney Plus, which has all the animated Marvel superhero series.
Yes.
And they don't have that. And it's got to be a rights issue of something.
When I got Disney Plus, I went scouring around and it says Marvel superheroes, but it's not that. There's a series there or something that says Marvel.
Yeah, they don't have those.
They don't have
those, and they don't have the Spider-Man from the 60s.
I don't know if it's because of the crudeness of the animation. What you folks listening might not realize about the original Marvel superheroes syndicated comics show is that the animation, to call it animation is kind of being generous because they lifted panels right from Jack Kirby and the other great artists from Marvel, and they barely moved on the screen. Yeah. You would hear voices, you see the mouth move, but you didn't see a whole lot of other things move. You'd see stock footage or stock illustrations move. I loved it anyway. And it was great voice acting in that thing and great theme songs. Tony Stark makes you feel.
Coolest guy with the hardest steel.
Oh, come on now. I mean, that's the groove, baby.
I didn't notice or care about the bad animation as a kid. That's the other thing. Like, when I first discovered them, I was too young to catch them first run, but I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I remember to this day watching them on TV. In fact, I didn't start collecting comics till I was about 11 or 12. So those kind of cartoons were my introduction to superheroes, even before comics.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I first found them. That, the Spider-Man show. There was, in the early 80s, there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. There was an X-Men series. There was a couple of Fantastic Four series. That's how I got into the superhero characters. It was also, do you remember from that same era from the Marvel superheroes in the 60s, DC had a series that was done through Filmation where they had like, there was Hawkman, the Atom, Superman was on it, and another character I can't think of, maybe the Flash,
Aquaman.
There were a few. There was an early Batman show.
I remember the
Super
Aquaman Hour.
Right, yeah, that was one. There was Superboy. You remember that?
Is this Filmation?
Filmation. There was Superboy with Crypto the Superdog.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all pre-Super Friends, all this stuff.
Right.
And in fact, Super Friends was created to be, even though it's a different company, it was made to be like the next step beyond all those shows. It was sort of like, hey kids, look what we're doing now. All these characters you love from those other cartoon shows, we're putting them all together now. They're the Justice League, even though we're not going to call them the Justice League.
Right. Oh boy, did I love the Justice League. To me, it was the best value in comics because you got them all.
Yep.
And same goes for, the Avengers. You got them all in one book. Yay.
Funny thing, when I got into comics, it was at the end of, it was the beginning of what I guess they now call the modern age, when Crisis on Infinite Earths had happened and Secret Wars was going on. So it was like the mid 80s. And I was not really a big DC Comics kid. I read almost exclusively Marvel. And then I started getting into Batman when the movie came out, the Tim Burton movie. I started buying Batman comics. And I also, a little before that, I was getting into Superman. But other than Superman and Batman, I didn't read a lot of DC Comics until many years later, until I was probably an adult reading comic books before I got into DC. I was totally brainwashed by the Marvel idea of all of what superheroes were. And what I loved, what Marvel always did better than DC is they had that interconnected universe where you really felt like every book was interacting with all the other books and everything was connected and there was continuity that made sense and they referred to things that had happened. They just had much more of a coherent sense of that than DC had in those days.
Well, as a kid reading both Marvel and DC, I always felt there was a giant difference between the two. DC was, there's an evildoer, we must vanquish him, whoever the superhero was. That was basically it.
Right.
Marvel heroes were, neurotic. You had Peter Parker, who kind of got dragged into being Spider-Man. You had the Hulk, who was tortured after being belted by those gamma rays. He knew his life was never going to be the same, and they had problems.
The Fantastic Four was constantly arguing with each other,
Yeah, but they had problems. It was like they had their own personal, the DC heroes were myopic. They just get the bad guy, and at the end they would all smile.
Right. And there was a huge thing at the time was that the Marvel characters lived in real cities, like actual cities that didn't, not made up city names. They were in New York City or wherever. They were in real actual cities in America.
Yes, true. Not Gotham City or Metropolis or,
Coast City, Keystone or whatever. Well, I forget what the Flash's one was. Central City, whatever. They would have all these names of fake cities,
Yeah. And the Silver Surfer, that would never be a DC character. The most tortured superhero mentally of anyone I can think of. He was a troubled soul. It was like.
And I've been waiting for a decent movie adaptation of that character. Never been done. Probably the biggest name Marvel character that has never. He showed up in one of those really bad Fantastic Four movies they made about 15, 20 years ago. He's never gotten his own movie. The other one who has never gotten his own movie is Namor the Submariner, who I loved, way cooler than Aquaman. He showed up in the sequel to Black Panther. And he was sort of like the villain in that. And it really was a very mediocre, I thought, representation of the character. They didn't nail it at all. But, I always liked that character.
You talk about Aquaman, right? Aquaman's supposed to look like Van Johnson. He's not supposed to look like Jason Momoa. I mean, it's just not even close. But they did that in the comic book.
They did that years ago.
Did they?
In the comic.
Did they change him from the blonde-haired?
So the look that they had of Jason Momoa playing the character, unfortunately, is actually not that far from the way they started drawing him. Even I would say going back 20 plus years ago. They really, I don't know why this was, but they felt they had to make him a much edgier type of character than he had been before, where, like you said, he looked like, a matinee idol. And he was, they I don't know why they feel like they got to do that with everybody, I guess. It's the Frank Miller effect, where everything has to be through this same kind of dingy, scruffy, edgy lens. Nobody is allowed to be squeaky clean anymore, I guess, even if you live in water.
True. Good point. Let's go back in time just a little bit. Hanna-Barbera.
Let's.
Remember the great Hanna-Barbera Tom and Jerry's? Hilarious cartoons. Yeah,
they created them. They created Hanna, what are they? Joe Barbera and William Hanna. Those were the names. They got their start working in the Hollywood studios. They worked at MGM. They created Tom and Jerry there in the 40s. And I think when that studio went under at the end of the 50s, they left. They didn't own Tom and Jerry. They couldn't take him with them. But that's when they started making all those great cartoons for television, like the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Top Cat, Johnny Quest, all that kind of stuff. Jim Cornette talks about the Herculoids. That was another sleeper favorite of mine, where they did like an actual superhero team, That was, they really pioneered TV animation in the 60s. They were a powerhouse.
Well, they learned how to do it on a budget too. I mean, those early Huckleberry Hounds, the early Huckleberry Hounds. When I was the first thing I ever remember watching was Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound. It's the first thing I ever remember. It's the first toy I ever got was a Huckleberry Hound, So it was like, man.
I have some mixed feelings about those Hanna-Barberas from that era, because it's like they're very funny. That's the thing. That's when they started doing all the celebrity impressions and things like that. Like you get the Flintstones as the Honeymooners, Top Cat is Sergeant Bilko. Like they all have. You get who was the shark that sounded like Curly from the Three Stooges? Jabberjaw, right? So like they would do that. The hippo. What was his name? Peter Potamus. He sounded like who was that guy with the big mouth? Oh man.
It wasn't Joe Besser?
No, the guy, he had this giant mouth.
You're gonna do it already. I can't
Joe
remember.
Besser. Yeah. No, Joey Brown.
Joey Brown, that's it.
The guy who would go, and he had that big giant mouth.
Yeah, that's
Peter Potamus sounded like him. So anyway, they're funny, but coming out of those beautifully drawn and animated Hollywood cartoons,
no, there's no comparison.
They look so cheap, and a lot of times it's very limited animation. In fact, what they started doing, this is in the Leonard Maltin book, on the cheap to cut corners. Just think about this. Okay, the studios would produce, like, let's say a Tom and Jerry cartoon would be 7 minutes long. It would take them about 3 weeks to make this thing 7 minutes long. And now Hanna-Barbera is going, okay, we'll make a 25-minute cartoon for Saturday morning in a week. Now, how do you do that, right? They started Xeroxing things. Like, instead of redrawing the characters over and over and over again, or the objects over and over to get the animation, they would only animate certain portions of the image, so it wasn't what they call full animation. Like if you watch a Disney cartoon or a Looney Tunes, everything's moving all the time in constant motion. If you watch those Hanna-Barberas, you have watch Scooby-Doo, right? Everybody's just standing there like a statue, and their mouth will just move when they talk. And then maybe like their arm might go up like that. and nothing is really moving that much, or in a much more limited way. And that's how you get it done. It's just shortcut animation, you know.
My problem with Hanna-Barbera into the 70s was, if you had a hit with Scooby-Doo and the gang riding around in the bus, there was another show that was just like it that came out about a year later. What was that show? There was another one where they ran around in a bus.
Well, there was Josie and the Pussycat.
Right.
There was the Dune Buggy show, which I think maybe is the one you're thinking about, where it was the car that talked, and it would be like...
No, there was another one with a girl with skunk hair, I used to say, and they used to run around.
That was Josie and the Pussycats.
No.
Before they went into space.
No, this is a different show. This was
Okay.
a different show, and I can't think of what it was. The something vehicle, I don't remember what it was, but
they were very...
They started
formulaic.
to repeat themselves, the formula over and over and over again, and then they took all the characters and put them in the wacky races, if you remember that. And
that was like the Avengers of Hanna-Barbera character, right? Where they just all popped up. And there was the other one too. It wasn't just wacky races. You remember the one where they would all be in like hot air balloons, traveling around the world? Like Yogi Bear was in it.
That's right.
And they would lump all their characters together, and it was very formulaic. So like they hit on this formula, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So it's like every show would have to have a kid and or a monkey or something that would be like the funny sidekick, you know? Like the most famous one is Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, obviously, who really were just supposed to be the supporting characters to these teenage like sleuths, right? But then it started becoming a thing where it even translated to the Super Friends, where it's like, okay, we're going to have 2 teenagers and a monkey from space, and they're going to hang out with you for no reason. Or we're going to have 2 teenagers and a dog that hangs out with the Super Friends for no reason whatsoever.
Right.
It was this formula, and part of the formula was, oh yeah, and we're going to have this guy who imitates this famous comedian, this guy imitates this famous comedian, and it was like the formula of doing every Hanna-Barbera series. They even did it when they adapted Godzilla into a Hanna-Barbera show.
Gravy. Do you remember? I believe Hanna-Barbera was behind this. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you remember the Banana Splits?
Of course I do. La, 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 la.
Was that
la,
Hanna-Barbera?
la.
Even though that wasn't animated, did they have a hand in that?
I can't remember if it was Hanna-Barbera or Sid and Marty Krofft. Do you remember those guys?
Yes, I do.
They did HR Puff and stuff.
Oh, God.
And Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. Not sure. Let me check that.
Yes. I'm doing
the Banana Split.
We're checking our respective Google machines.
It was Hanna-Barbera, because if I'm not mistaken, didn't they used to introduce cartoons sometimes?
Yes, that's right. They did. They did do that.
They had like their wraparound things,
right?
And then
that was the most bizarre show. I mean, literally in the beginning of the show, you would see them literally running around into each other, bang, for no reason. They're just running around, and there was a laugh track.
Yes, there was a laugh track.
That show was bizarre. I don't know if it was a hit or not, but that still pops up every so often. I catch it, and I'm like, ooh.
Even as a kid, I couldn't get into that. It just was very. It just did not appeal to me at all. Didn't like it.
No, I wasn't a fan either, but I watched it with my mouth agape, even as a kid. I was like, what is this?
There was a lot of stuff like that. There was, remember the one about that had the monkey on it? He was like a monkey detective or secret agent or something. What am I thinking of?
Oh, Lance Link's Secret Chimp.
That's the one. Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp.
That's it.
There was some weird stuff like that back then.
Oh, Lancelot. Remember his girlfriend?
Yeah.
And at the end, they were a rock band.
Yes, of course they were.
Everybody was a rock band. The Archie started that, and then every cartoon, all of a sudden they were all rock bands. And Lance and his girlfriend.
I do remember this. Yes,
I remember the lyrics to one of the songs. Tick tock, 4:00, morning is near. I can't remember my birthday, but I can remember that. I don't understand. I'm a weird guy. That's all I can say. But so this was fun. I'm glad. I did not know you knew this much about cartoony cartoons.
you're really letting me loose here because I never get to talk about this crap except to like my wife and kids. So
Mhm.
they are free now. I can talk to you about it. I don't know. I think the reason is that I got so into it is because I loved them so much growing up and then they went away. And so I started getting curious about, hey, what happened to these cartoons I loved as a kid? And then I started learning more about them and how they were made and the fact that because the funny thing is when you're a kid, you don't always realize like you're watching these Looney Tunes cartoons in the 70s and 80s. These things are like 30, 40 years old then when you're watching them. And you don't really think about that this is, I'm watching on Saturday morning, the Bugs Bunny and Tweety Hour. I'm a Generation X kid watching these cartoons on a Saturday morning, cartoons that were in the movie theater before my father was born, some of them,
Right.
And you don't really think about that. So I started getting fascinated by this history, like where they came from, who made them. And, 30 years later, I'm this half-assed expert on it with no
Hey.
outlet.
So when I say Termite Terrace, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
That was the Leon Schlesinger studio. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. They contracted them for the Warner Brothers one before they brought it all in house. Yes.
My favorite is the Warner Brothers cartoons by a mile, but I will say this. I am very romantic about Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear because I remember distinctly being 4 years old sitting on the floor with
Yes.
our black and white TV, black and white, mind you, and watching those cartoons and
Quick Draw McGraw.
Quick Draw McGraw, that whole era. I don't know what to say other than I don't know wistful is the right word. I'm just it just takes me back to a time when I didn't have a trouble in the world. You know what I'm saying?
And that's the other cool thing about, to bring it back to the MeTV thing is, it started as a Saturday morning block on the regular MeTV. That was the foot in the water thing. And so they do every Saturday morning from 7 to 10, they show these classic cartoons on MeTV. And they were trying to replicate that amazing Saturday morning experience that we used to have, where it was the greatest thing in the world, where, now you have 24-hour channels for kids. You have YouTube where they could call up any damn video they ever want to see, right? But when we were kids, it wasn't like that. You were living in a grown-up's world. It was
right.
The only time you could watch anything that was made for you on TV. It was Saturday morning, and there might be maybe on syndicated a couple of hours after school when they knew the kids were coming home, like 3 to 5-ish. There might be some kids-related shows on, like they'd have the Little Rascals on, or there'd be like when I was a kid, there would be like He-Man and G.I. Joe. It would be in that little time frame. But outside those little windows, you were watching what the grown-ups wanted to watch, and that was it.
Right.
And your Uncle Frank was sitting in a lazy boy, smoking a cigar in the house, watching Wild Kingdom, and goddamn it, you had to watch it because that's what he was watching, and that was it.
That's right. Oh gosh, we're talking nostalgia here. Sunday evenings, we had Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, followed by Walt Disney, at least in my town.
Right, The Wonderful World of Disney.
Right,
that show. I have post-traumatic stress from that show, not because of the show itself. That show, if I remember right, didn't it used to come on at like 7?
Yes,
like
on
7?
Sunday evening. Yes, 6 or 7. Yeah.
This is why I know this, because during the school year, I would get into fights with my mom because she'd be trying to put me to bed. It's dark out. You got school in the morning, and I'm going, Mom, the Wonderful World of Disney is on right now. Why would they have this on TV right now if it's a kid's bedtime? This show is for kids. And that didn't really work. But I had to go to bed and miss the Wonderful World of Disney because I had school in the morning. But that was another like little time frame that you get to watch.
How old were you at that point? You must have been a little wee tadpole.
I'm thinking like first grade, second grade.
Yeah, 5.
And I'm getting ready for bed like between 7 and 8,
Oh man.
Now I realize that struggle now as a parent is you just want some peace so you could do what you want to do for a couple of hours at night. Just get them to bed, go to sleep.
Well, you're a parent.
Yeah. So I could like have a couple of hours to think.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I was such into TV. I think TV made me a writer. I think I learned to read looking at the captions on television and determining what, like if they said Chevrolet and there was a Chevrolet name on it, I knew that was Chevrolet. I
Yeah.
really think the TV taught me how to read. Do you have any similar feelings to that, or?
Well, I also was from that generation where with public television, you started getting the kids' educational shows. That was another little pocket for kids. So I'm watching Sesame Street. I'm watching Mr. Rogers. I'm watching The Electric Company, things like that. We had Channel 13 in New York. And I credit those shows, maybe Sesame Street the most, for the fact that, like, for example, I knew how to read completely, like read. I'm not talking about Crime and Punishment, but like I could read Green Eggs and Ham, let's say, before I even started kindergarten.
Me too.
I walked
Same
in there
thing, yeah.
fully being able to, you put a word in front of me, I could sound it out by the age of 4 easily. And it was because of those shows on TV.
We have the same background. I remember they called my mother into school. I'm serious. I was starting kindergarten, and one of the teachers saw me mouthing the words as I'm reading a book, like a C spot run spot run, one of those things. They called my mother in and they handed me a book, not a kid's book, but a book. And they said, "Bobby, read this." And I read it. And they said, "We think we're going to move Bob up a grade." And they did. Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah, I'm that old where in kindergarten we had the Dick and Jane books to read.
Right, yeah.
The ones that they make fun of now, that was the actual book that you learned to read.
My God, I can remember what the book said. It said, "Look at all the dogs, black dogs and white dogs." That's what I read out of the first book. And then they made me read something out of a newspaper or something.
Yeah, it was see Dick, see Jane, see Dick run, see Jane run, see Spot. Yes, that's how we learned to read.
I wonder if Dick and Jane and all those characters survive to this day. It's a good question.
The one funny thing, that these weird things that stick in your mind. So, I started kindergarten in 1979. And the 70s was really the era where the culture in America was trying to be more diverse. Like, people talk about it now like it's some new thing. And I feel like certainly now more than ever, we see it pervasive in our culture. But the 70s was the beginning of, let's have some people on TV that aren't white. Hey, that's a novel idea. And so one thing I remember from kindergarten is that they had introduced a black character in the Dick and Jane books, where I forget her name, but they had a friend who was black, a black girl. And that was really kind of a product of that 70s era. Like, if you had read the original Dick and Jane books, which I think they go back to like the 40s and 50s, you were not going to find that. But by the time you get to the 70s, they were trying to change with the times a little bit. So something that sticks in my head from those early years.
There's been a lot of, I just want to get this off my chest. There's been a lot of kid vid out there throughout the decades. But if there's a heaven, a literal heaven, Fred Rogers and Jim Henson are there. Because the good they have done on this mortal coil, the literal good they have done is awe-inspiring to somebody like me. Because, as an adult, I look back at the works they did. Holy smokes, man.
Two completely wonderful people, yes. And I try to show Mr. Rogers to my kids. My older kids, when they all, he died, I think, in 2001 or so. And, my kids weren't born yet. But my older kids were little when they were still showing them on Channel 13, the old ones. That's not the case anymore, but I think they do stream on the PBS app. You can watch them and things like that. But I try to show them to my kids, because the other thing, as you remember, there's nothing like that on TV now. Nothing with that kind of, it's gentle and quiet, and it talks to children in a way that is not insulting, but it's not crass. It's not in your face. It's not patronizing, but it is at the level of a child. And there's just something so beautiful about it. It's not trying to sell you anything, which is very important. And there is absolutely, nothing like it now and nothing like it before. It's just its own unique thing on television.
Absolutely. And not that extent, but I've always been an admirer of Bob Keeshan too. Captain Kangaroo. I think they know how to do it. It was a different era, but all three, they're all so gentle. It's like I can't put it into words. There's absolutely no violence, no put downs, no insults. The
No
worst thing that ever
snark.
happened to the
That's the
captain
thing.
was the captain got the ping pong balls dropped on his head by Mr. Moose.
Well, there was no snark or sarcasm.
Right.
That's the thing. Like, believe me, look, I have raised 2 children to adulthood, and now I have a 7-year-old. I have watched every iteration of children's entertainment of the last quarter century easily. And I can tell you that the stuff that's made for kids today, it really is just, it's dripping with biting snark and sarcasm and very adult. I don't mean adult in the sense of like obscene or anything. I mean adult in tone, if that makes sense. Kind of humor that I guess what they're trying to do is they're trying to entertain the parents that are stuck watching it too. But so the children now, they're awash with this kind of very smart ass stuff that is very concerning to me, how it will shape a young mind. I mean, yeah, granted, we just spent an hour talking about how great it was to watch the Looney Tunes when we were kids, which are about as smart ass as it gets, right?
Right.
But you also had Snow White, Fantasia, Pinocchio. You know what I mean? They were all kinds of things for kids. There was gentle and sweet and kind and nurturing. To find entertainment like that for kids today is very, very hard. Because even Disney itself doesn't produce it anymore. That style is over with.
I don't want to be on a downer.
It's very cynical.
No, you're right about
today.
it. We're living in an era of one-upsmanship. You don't win anymore. You rub your opponent's nose and the loser in the mud. I think it's bad for society, and I think that people derive pleasure out of, I don't know, conflict. It's like the mindset of a win and a loss now is entirely different than it was. I bowl, as you know, and I told you I won a lot of money bowling recently. And I see families, they take the 2 kids out bowling. And, there's always the one kid that's like, ha, I won, you lose, and, rubbing their nose in it. That's learned behavior. That's, it's not, let's all bowl well. Let's all do good. No, I won.
I always taught my kids not to do that because that's the kind of thing that also has driven me away from doing school sports with my kids. I'm not saying they never do it, but it makes it an unpleasant experience. You get these parents that they act like, I don't know, maybe they're like vicariously experiencing this through their kids or something. And they forget the whole point is to have fun. And I think sometimes the coaches forget it. It's like everybody forgets it. When my son used to play soccer or baseball or things, right before he went out there, a lot of these parents are going, kill him and make sure you got to do it this way. And I would just go, have a good time. Have fun with your friends. It's a game. You're supposed to have fun. Do your best. Have a good time. You're 8. This isn't the Olympics. You're not going, God bless you. You're not going to become a multimillionaire in the NFL. Just go and have fun. That's what this is all about. It's for fun. And I feel like an alien when I say these things, No,
I believe it. Sportsmanship is so passé. Sportsmanship. Remember that? Remember? We used to
even
teach
the
us that.
coaches.
We need civics, my friend. Civics. But let's not get off on a rant. Hey, before we wrap this up, Roger Corman just died.
Yes.
Were you into any of his films? Are you aware of his legacy? It's the oddest legacy in Hollywood, but people seem to really love the guy.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was steadily making movies from the 50s right up till now. He has a couple of movies in pre-production which haven't even come out yet. And mainly as a producer, but also as a director. And, my thing with him is the stuff I really love is when he was still directing movies and he still had budgets, like in the 50s and 60s. He went on and he would make these incredibly entertaining exploitation movies, 70s, 80s, 90s horror movies and things. He made Sharknado. I mean, Sharknado was his product from his studio. But what I love more than anything in the world are the Edgar Allan Poe movies from the 60s.
Right.
The ones he did mostly with Vincent Price, but he did one with Ray Milland. I forget which one it is. Where I guess they couldn't get Vincent Price. I forget which one. But Tomb of Lygia, The House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum.
The Pit and the Pendulum is one I was thinking of. Yeah,
The Haunted Palace, which is like almost like a Lovecraft story.
The Raven too is another one.
Yeah,
I saw plenty of those movies. They were on TV all the time.
They had production value. You know, they had name actors in them. They felt like, even though they were still not big Hollywood movies, they felt like big Hollywood movies. And a lot of the movies he made later on, most definitely did not. But those did. And I love Vincent Price. And I will always say, I'm a big horror movie guy. And people will try to, what's your favorite horror movie series? And they expect me to say, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nightmare on Elm Street, or whatever. And I'll say, it's the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies of the 60s. That is my favorite horror movie series.
But you don't think Attack of the 50-Foot Cheerleader was a classic? I mean, that's one of his too, you know.
I enjoy it, but well, the other thing with him is he got so many people started. I mean, Scorsese started with him, Coppola, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, like these people, John Carpenter, I think. They were like under the learning tree of Roger Corman, and they all escaped and went on to be much bigger deals than Roger Corman, but they all started there with him.
I'm reading the actors and other film people talk about him in the newspaper the last couple of days, and it's universal how admired and liked he was to work for, and they all say thank you, Roger. Every one of them.
Yes, he's got a cameo in Godfather 2. You know that?
Yes, I did know that.
He's one of the senators in the Senate hearing scene with Michael Corleone and Willie Chichi and all that. He's one of those guys, and that's because Coppola loved him. But I have to say though, not to bring it negative again, there was one which really pissed me off, and it started making the rounds because it was so bitter and mean. Paul Schrader, the screenwriter, the director, he's the guy that wrote Taxi Driver and a bunch of other things, and I think he might have started with Corman. He blasted him right after the guy died.
Really?
He put out a tweet talking about how, you know, nobody wanted to work with him, and he was cheap, and everybody was happy to get away from him. And like, why do you look, even if you feel that way, why would you say that right after somebody dies? Come on. What's the matter with you?
I agree with you.
Common decency.
Again, decency. You said it, my friend. You said it. Decency.
Well, this is the thing that drives me nuts, and it's where we discover, look, every single human being is flawed. They do this thing now. It's like this ritual. After every major celebrity dies, it's the initial shock and the celebrations of their life, and then legions of people crawling out of their holes to talk about every bad thing the person ever did and drag them through the mud and why they were actually terrible and awful and we shouldn't celebrate them and they suck. It happens with almost every single person that dies. Have you noticed this?
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible.
It's how times have changed. You know, you would never do that in the past. Even if you were at loggerheads with somebody your whole life, once they're dead, that's it. That should be over. There's no need to drag somebody literally through the mud.
What happened to don't speak ill of the dead? You know, look,
yeah, exactly.
Unless the guy was a mass murderer or some type of serial child molester or something like, look, that's different. Everybody has done horrible things. Everybody has opinions and beliefs that other people are going to find to be reprehensible and terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put that magnifying glass on, there is absolutely nobody who is going to die that will not be eulogized in a negative way. It's impossible. Fred Rogers might be the only one, right?
Somebody said justly, they crucified Jesus Christ.
Yeah, right.
If they can do that,
with that guy,
if
the guy just basically sasaid, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we all loved each other?"
Yeah, right. You know? Yeah. So if they did that, imagine what they're going to say about Bob Smith. I mean, come on now. I mean, it's you don't want to be around to hear it, right? Brian, you're a one of a kind. I had no idea you knew so much about all kinds of anime. What don't you know about? Are you like down on football or something like that? I mean,
actually, yes. I'm not. I never have been a football guy. Here's the funny thing. So baseball, yes, I love baseball. And because it's been in my family, I was always into boxing because I have fighters and coaches in my family.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my thing. If you have a minute and you want to hear why I'm not into football, maybe you might understand my explanation because a lot of people don't. So I grew up in this very old school Italian family, even though I don't have an Italian name. And I grew up around these kind of Depression era, World War II era people in my family. And they really helped to raise me. They helped my parents in a big way. And so I grew up with a lot of their sensibilities. These were people who grew up in a time in the 20th century when football hadn't really become professional football, NFL football, AFL, hadn't become the mega deal that it is today. So it's like, pre-Super Bowl era, the hottest sports in America are baseball and boxing. Those are like, the biggest sports in America through the middle of the 20th century. So because of that, growing up in this family, football was never, ever a thing. Nobody in my family watched it. I mean, we were like, I don't know, like some weird family. I mean, not even on Thanksgiving, nothing. It was baseball, yes. My grandfather was obsessed. My father, Mets fan. My grandfather was a Yankees fan, or a Dodgers fan. And boxing, we would always talk about boxing and fighters and things. And football was just never, ever a priority. I can probably count on two hands the amount of football games that I have watched in my entire life. And if you take out Super Bowls, I think maybe one or two games in my entire life that I have ever watched.
But football to me is the fourth of the fourth major sports. And here's why. It's real simple. My school didn't have a football team.
Right, because it takes money to have a team. We didn't have one either.
No.
We couldn't afford to have a field. Our big sports were the ones that you could play in the gym. So we had wrestling was our big sport, and basketball was our big sport because we couldn't afford. When we would have the track meets and things, we would have to go to the public park to have the track at the public park in the city. We didn't have the land. We didn't have the money. So yeah, it's like football was never a cultural thing for me at all. My dad never watched it. My grandfather never watched it. My uncles who I was around all the time never watched it. So I never watched
it. We couldn't play it.
Couldn't play it, right?
I mean, if I couldn't play it, I wasn't that into it. And my family wasn't into it. And I never watched it until I was a full-grown adult, to be honest with you.
It just doesn't appeal to me. I find it dull and slow and boring. It's like there's explosions of action. And most of the time, you're doing nothing, because people will tell me baseball is boring. Okay. Because, it's a slow game. But the difference with baseball is, there are explosions of action and then it gets really slow for a while. But the game is always ongoing. And you're sitting there in what appears to you to be slow, boring moment. You're waiting and watching to see what's the next pitch. What's the guy on first base going to do? Is the leadoff run at the plate? What could happen within the next couple of minutes? And then boom, it's like a wrestling match. All of a sudden there's a high spot. Boom, something exciting happens. And then you settle back down again. I like that. That is the sports experience that I like to have. That's also why I like watching old school wrestling because the matches are laid out that way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Here, I'll show you how outdated I am. I don't like the ballparks today. It's like being caught inside a PlayStation 5. Swirling lights and loud music.
Yes.
And
Yes.
It's a din. You can't talk to the person next to you. Baseball used to be pastoral. Shea Stadium was pastoral. You could talk to the person next to you. There'd be an organist playing light jingles between batters. It wasn't a constant bombardment. And now you go to Citi Field on Friday nights, there's a DJ playing before the game and during the game. And there's noise, lights.
Yeah. The last time I went to a ball game.
It takes away from it. It doesn't enhance it. It takes away from it.
The last time I went to a ball game, talk about a DJ, I went to a Yankee or Mets game or one of them. And they had Funkmaster Flex, who's like the Hot 97, like hip hop DJ in New York. Funkmaster Flex came out and played a set. And I'm like, this is nuts. Because, the baseball, sometimes the older announcers will talk about this and say that they miss it. That it was quiet. There were like lulls of, you could hear the guy selling hot dogs.
Yeah.
Things would get really quiet and then there would be an explosion and the place would go nuts. Something incredible would happen. And now it's just They have to fill every quiet moment with noises and music and announcements and sounds. The batters get entrance music like wrestlers.
Right.
I mean, the game, they try to amp it up because of that. Everything has to be louder, faster, bigger, in your face. You can't just have a quiet moment that just sits there and breathes where you're in the moment waiting for what's going to happen next. It is extremely distracting, yes.
Now someone hits a home run and fireworks go off. I mean, it could be a 2-1 game in the 5th inning.
Right. Well, the Mets started that with the apple in the hat. I mean, come on.
Did you notice that last season they started running out of the dugout and it looked like an indie wrestling introduction because they ran into the dugout and they had smoke pots and they didn't really translate? It's like the Schmengies. Remember they had those little toy sword sabers? They wanted to put that on stage. So here come the Mets running out of the dugout and they have smoke pots to the left and right like a rock concert or an NFL game. It didn't play. There wasn't enough of it.
No.
It just looked every little
boxing,
thing.
Boxing copied wrestling now. Boxing for decades now has been having elaborate entrance music for the boxers. And, you know, I think of my grandfather, who was a fighter and a coach for decades. He was in the Golden Gloves program and, you know, he worked with a lot of fighters. And he was such a boxing purist, man. And I think about how he must be rolling over in his grave. You know, he really despised a lot of the cartoonish theatrics and he would hate when he even hated when they would get, which now is the standard, when they would get the fighters to try to pretend that they hated each other and they had some type of beef and start, you know, fighting at the press conference. He hated things like that because he believed in the purity of the sport and not turning it into a circus. And that is long gone. Forget it. That ship has sailed. So that ship is in another port on the other side of the planet right now. I don't think he would even recognize boxing today, what they've done to it, especially with the Paul brothers and everything. I don't.
We could talk about wrestling too, how their introductions take a half an hour in the beginning of a show or of a 2-hour show. It's incredible. Somebody
World Wrestling entrances.
Somebody timed on a 2-hour Raw or 3-hour Raw. They timed how much of the time was spent walking from the back of the arena into the ring, and they just timed those things. And one show came up to about 37 minutes of just walking.
Right.
Out of the 3 hours.
The thing that gets, a couple of things that get me, and I know why they do it now, but you know how every wrestler now has this very carefully detailed and elaborate choreographed entrance that they do, where they have to hit this. It's so mechanical. They hit the same exact movements, the same gestures. They enter the ring in the same way every single time in this very rehearsed way. It feels very artificial and mechanical. And the worst part is you'll get guys that are in like a blood feud and they hate each other's guts. And I'm thinking, why the hell are you doing this elaborate routine to get in the ring? You hate this guy. You want him in a pile of blood at your feet. And you're doing a dance routine before you get in the ring with him, you know? But now the problem is it's gotten to the point where the fans who come, the fan base they have, and I think even who watch it on TV, but especially the ones that are paying tickets to see it live, that's what they're paying to see. And if you don't give them that, they're going to feel gypped of their money. They didn't get to see the gigantic bloodline entrance. They didn't get to see the lightning for The Rock and the whole, you know, they will feel gypped. And I understand that point of view, but that's the audience they've cultivated. That's part of what they are coming to see is those
the audiences are conditioned. They want the sizzle as well as the steak. They actually want the sizzle. And
they do.
But the first wrestling I ever saw, it was two guys already standing in the ring with Joe McHugh in the middle going, and ladies and gentlemen, weighing 250 pounds from Altoona, Pennsylvania, Joe Blanders. That's all it was. It was like a boxing match, but with wrestling.
And it feels so, that's the thing about it is, because I've been watching a lot of those too lately, it all feels so unrehearsed and natural.
Right.
They're just coming out there. They're interacting with fans. You know, they're just in the moment. And that's the other thing too. The announcers, people will kill me for this because, you know, I know Samantha Irvin is like the hot new thing now as an announcer. And I loved what she did at WrestleMania. And I loved her intro of Cody and things like that. And she's got a lot of heart and she's talented. but I miss the days when the ring announcer would just, there's a difference between making something feel important and putting yourself over as a character in the show. And I feel like Howard Finkel really stood in the middle of that, where it's like he knew that perfect balance where he was just enough, where he added that bombast and made it feel important, but he didn't go that extra inch where all of a sudden he became a character that's putting himself over.
Right.
And I love those old school announcers because what they seem to be is exactly what they are. A guy that you handed him a card with the names and a microphone, and you just said, here, say their names, tell the people, what the match is, and then get out of the ring and announce the winner at the end. Because stuff like that, as unbombastic as it is, it makes it feel so very real.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we lack today.
I think we'll leave it at that, since we're both wrestling people, and
Yes.
Now we're talking wrestling on the entertainment show. But
sorry,
you're an entertaining guy. Tell the folks what you're up to. Tell them how to get a hold of you and find your fine works wherever they may be.
Sure. Well, I'm currently working on a biography of Gorilla Monsoon called Irresistible Force, which will be coming out next year. But as for right now, there's two things. I have my own podcast, which is Shut Up and Wrestle with Brian R. Solomon. You can find it wherever you find podcasts. It's an old school themed wrestling podcast with rotating guests. The subjects change from week to week. And I'm now starting up a Patreon that's associated with the show called the Shut Up and Wrestle Commentaries. And you can find it on patreon.com/shutupandwrestle. And what I'm doing is I'm recording audio commentaries, almost like a DVD commentary, for different historical wrestling events. So you can sync up my audio with the video of, let's say, the night Hulk Hogan won the heavyweight title at Madison Square Garden. And if you sync them up together, I'm walking you through the entire card and giving you background information and history and fun facts and things through the whole show. And I just started that on my Patreon. So that's a new project I'm trying to get off the ground. And on Twitter, I am Brian R. Solomon.
Facebook too, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm on Instagram, Brian R. Solomon. I'm on my writer page on Facebook is Brian Solomon Writer. People can get me there too. And there's links to my my author website and on all those platforms.
And please don't forget about the place I used to work.
Oh, you really want me to run down everything?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I write magazines. I contribute to, I could be wrong, I believe I am the first writer to ever simultaneously write for more than one wrestling magazine company. Because I'm a contributing writer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I'm a contributing writer for Inside the Ropes magazine. So you can find my stuff in both of those. To get them online, it's InsideTheRopesMagazine.com and PWI-online.com. And since we're plugging everything, I'll plug my two most recent books. There was the superheroes book that you mentioned, The History of a Pop Culture Phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro, and my famous award-winning Chic biography, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Chic.
Does all this and still achieves a healthy work-life balance, which is something, even in my advanced age, I've never been able to do. You must have a ton of energy, my friend. Either that or you know how to sleep right. Something's different between the two of us. I am always like frazzled and got to get this done,
Well, I don't sleep right. And actually, there's one other thing since you're bringing it up, and this is why I don't sleep right. Because Brian Last, I owe this to him. I got to mention it. But the project, honestly, that I work on the most on a daily basis is the wrestling news. People may not know I'm affiliated with it because Mike Sempervive is the anchor and he produces the recordings of it every morning. But I write most of the script every day. I'm the news director for Arcadian Vanguard, and that's that Brian Last's podcast network. And we put out this daily morning newscast. It's like, imagine if NPR or PBS or something had a 10-minute bulletin every morning where they just talked about wrestling news. And it's devoid of opinion. It's no clickbait and none of that crap. It's no non-news stories. Like, find out what Paul Heyman really thought about Joey Styles. None of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the news of the day every day. And I write up the script, and it contains the results of the big shows, but also other kind of breaking news and events of the day. And you can get it at thewrestlingnews.com or the Arcadian Vanguard YouTube page. You can find it there too. And that I'm up late most nights writing. So
You'd have to be, right? Because it comes out the next morning. Yeah.
My wife loves it, let me tell you.
I'm sure she does. You're one of a kind, Brian. And I'm glad that we've gotten to know each other this last 2 or 3 years. I really am. And would you give Brian Last my regards? We did have a correspondence at one point last year, and I just want to say hi to him. And I've been hanging out with all his stars lately. I just did a podcast with Steve Gennarelli and John McAdam. So yep. I feel like I'm like tugging at the pant leg of Arcadian. Hi, Brian.
Yeah, no, I absolutely will. And maybe they could have you on Jim's show one day. That would be cool. The Jim Cornette Experience.
I don't know. I just got done telling on one of my podcasts a somewhat funny story about me trying to tell Jim Cornette a joke.
Have you met him? Did you from PWI
I met Jim in the day.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
Working for PWI. And he's talking with Bill Apter, and they trade jokes because they're both jokesters. Yeah. And Apter goes, Bob, come over here and tell Jim Cornette that joke you told me earlier. And I'm looking at Cornette, even then I'm going, oh God, this is a comic master. This is like walking up to Eddie Murphy and saying, I got a joke for you.
Right.
So I start to tell the joke, and I'm doing dialects and all this other stuff. And I get to the punchline, and I go, bleh, and I start to mess up because I knew I was talking to Cornette. So I said, wait a minute, here's the punchline. And then he goes, whoa. I know he was just being nice because I screwed the pooch. I just absolutely ruined it. I ruined the joke in front of Jim Cornette. And that's probably if he even remembers me, that's probably the only memory he has of me at this point. So
well, that could be your chance to make up for it.
Yeah. I talk a
after
little
all
bit
these
my
years.
Old age. Yeah. Well, anyway, this is Brian R. Solomon. You are one of a kind. I hope we get to talk again about something soon somewhere, because I always enjoy your company and your work. I'm decades older than you, and you're my writing idol at this point, and you're my media idol, and I really mean that, because it's like you're able to do all this stuff with such a sense of professionalism and class, and I really appreciate all of this. I really do.
Thank you, Bob. I don't know what to say. I'm flattered. These are people that I looked up to. I was reading your articles in PWI, when I was in high school. And I had a conversation this morning with Keith Elliott Greenberg. I don't know if you know him, but he was.
Sure, I do. Yeah, sure.
Okay. And he was like my hero in WWF magazine, reading his articles and Raw magazine and everything. And I'm on the phone with him today. And he told me I was like a mentor to him. And I said, well, how could that be, Keith? I mean, you're my mentor. I look up to you. It's flattering to me that people that I admired and look up to and still do are now tell me things like this. I don't even know what to do with that.
I have such an admiration for Keith. He called me asking for questions for a book he's writing, right? A couple of years ago or a year ago or so. I'm afraid to ask him to come on my podcast because I'm in awe of the guy.
Oh,
I'm still a fan.
You should. He is great. He's got a book now, which I don't know if he'll talk about it yet until it comes out on a show, but especially when it comes out, he is writing a book that strictly focuses on WrestleMania 3 at the Silverdome. Mm-hmm. Everything about it, everything that went into it, how it changed the whole business and the territorial system dying and all that.
I think I'm going to be quoted in that book. I think.
Okay, so maybe that's the book he interviewed you for.
Mm-hmm,
yeah, but he would love to talk about that. You should have him.
I've got to get him on the show. If Keith, if you're listening, I'm going to give you a buzz because he called me, so I might as well call him back. So in any event, as I try to garner guests for my 2 podcasts, this is Brian R. Solomon. Go out and get his books. With his varied collection, you're bound to find something you like. And the Superheroes book is really one of a kind. It's called Superheroes! The history of a pop culture phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro. There's nothing else like it, and you can find it anywhere books are sold. Brian, see you soon, hopefully.
All right.
And that's just about the way this show is going to be, right? We're going to talk about all kinds of things, veer off into different entertainment topics and moments and memories. all of it with nostalgia in mind. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this show. And if the first one is any indication of how the rest of them are going to be, I'm going to be one happy camper. I'll tell you that much right now. So in any event, my name is Bob Smith once again, entertainment and sports writer for years and years and years, and a singer. Robert Charles music can be heard on Amazon and Spotify. Our website, we have one already, outdatedentertainmenthour.buzzsprout.com, where we will list all of our shows. We're available on every single podcast app that I can think of, with the exception of TuneIn, which is doing a reconfiguring of how they're allowing podcasts on there, which is fine because we're everywhere else. Even some obscure ones like Samsung News, I still don't understand why it's called that, but you can listen to podcasts there. It's usually built in on most Samsung telephones. And of course, Apple and Spotify and all the other biggies. Please check in with me on Facebook. My name is Bob Smith. I'm the one singing with B.B. King on my page, my Facebook page. That's how you find out who I am. Yeah, I sang with B.B. King 10 times, my friends. Most mere mortals can't say they did that. Well, in any event, you can also write to us at outdatedent, E-N-T, at gmail.com. Outdatedent, E-N-T, at gmail.com. We've already got a couple more shows coming up to be recorded within the next several days. We're really looking forward to hopefully entertaining you as we look back at great entertainment from the past. That's it. That's what this show is going to be about. We're going to do a lot of television. We're going to do an upcoming show with an up-and-coming Americana star. And we're going to talk about the history of Americana music, too. So a lot of cool stuff coming your way. I bet you don't even know what Americana music is. Well, we're going to explain that to you. Most people don't know what Americana means. We're going to delve into that really, really strongly with a talented young man named Pete Mancini. He's already made national waves, emanating from the Long Island area, and there's a lot more to come from this great guy. So in any event, that's it for me. My name is Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Entertainment Hour, a production of Bob Smith Podcasts.